here to speak on this important issue. The next seminar in this series will be on Wednesday, November the 21st at 12 noon. Our guest speaker is Dr. Beth Jukes. She is the Chair of Management Sciences in the Faculty of Engineering, and she'll be speaking on infusion pump management at Grand River Hospital. The third announcement is that we are holding our 5th Health Informatics Boot Camp at York University on November 14th to the 16th. We're still taking registrations, so any of you in this audience are more than welcome to register. It's online, so at hi.uwaterloo.ca. We're very pleased that Gordon Sanderson is our speaker today. He hails from quite a distance from New Zealand, and I am not going to introduce our speaker because that's Maher's job. So Maher, will you please introduce our speaker?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Professor Gordon Sanderson from New Zealand. Gordon is a senior lecturer of ophthalmology at Otago School of Medicine, and he is also adjunct professor at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Professor Sanderson is the only optometrist ever who is an honorary fellow of the Royal Australia and New Zealand College of Ophthalmologists. His clinical interests include contact lenses and low vision. In 2006, he was awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit for his services to visually impaired people. Today, Professor Sanderson will talk about his experience with the international distant teaching at the University of Otago, New Zealand. Welcome, Gordon.
Thank you, Mar. Thank you, Shirley. You'll be pleased to know I'm not claiming my travel expenses for coming here today. Perhaps I should have called it Why Not Teach Ophthalmology on the Internet, but in fact I've called it E for Eyes. And I'd just quickly like to acknowledge the other people on the list here. We've got two of our adjunct lecturers, Brendan Vogt and Richard Gardner, who are both Australians, as it turns out, but they're actually working for us. And Rodney Tamblin is the guy who I'll be talking more about shortly when I mention the Oceanbrowser content management system. I think if we ever get a corporate car, this will be the registration that we use. That's what a New Zealand registration plate looks like, for those of you who haven't been there. We're allowed to choose any combination of letters or numbers as long as it's no greater than 6. So that would fit nicely on my corporate Rolls Royce when I make my fortune. Okay, so we've got a postgraduate diploma in ophthalmic basic sciences, which is abbreviated to PG DIPS Opth BSci, and it's taught exclusively on the internet. And I'll just briefly tell you, well, I'll give you a little bit of a background as we go through probably. Consists of 5 800 level papers. The reason for 800 level is that these guys have already done 6 years of medicine. We won't accept them until they've been both a trainee intern and a first year house surgeon. So in effectively they're in their 8th year by the time they reach us. So we got away with calling it an 800 level. It's the only postgraduate 800 level paper that's actually offered on the internet by the university. There are a couple of 700 levels and lots of lower levels, but we've got the only 800 so far. It consists of, or 4 of them rather, consist of 13-week lecture programs which are provided within each semester. Semesters, I think, are the same as here, 14 weeks per year, and 4 papers are taught using a distance learning platform exclusively. The 5th paper is it's a practicum where they come to us for 3 weeks, or they can go to Sydney for 3 weeks and hone their practical skills if they choose. And all distance papers are often each semester, so they can pick and choose whenever they want to do the papers entirely at their own whim. Assignments are set at 3 weekly intervals, and at the end of this semester is a final written exam, which are 3-hour exams, so it's quite a tough call on the students. In order to get onto the course, you have to be medically qualified, and you must, as I said before, have done at least 2 years postgraduate study. We don't insist that they be registered, but we insist that they be eligible for registration in their own country. And the majority of candidates don't live in Dunedin. In fact, the majority don't even live in New Zealand. I'll just have to explain a little bit about how this comes to pass. We've in effect got two masters. We work for the university, but we're serving the college. And the college, it's very similar to the system in Canada. If you want to be an ophthalmologist in Canada, you must first do medicine, and then you must do 4 years postgraduate apprenticeship, really. They don't use the word apprentice, but it is basically an apprenticeship, at which time you're eligible to sit for the, in the Canadian case, it's the Royal Canadian College of Surgeons, I think, brackets ophthalmology, and in Australia and New Zealand, it's the Australian New Zealand College of Ophthalmologists. And you can sit their exam having done your minimum of 4 years. The problem is it's very competitive, and in Australia and New Zealand there are about 160 candidates every year, rather, all competing for about 20 places. So it's very, very tough to get on this course. And if they arrive at their interview, and they're all interviewed for these positions, if they arrive at their interview with a CV that just stands out from the others, then there's a much greater chance of getting on. There's an irony here as well, because even though they're applying to get onto a college training scheme, they're actually going to be employed by a hospital. So it's a very strange relationship, and it's a very fragile relationship too, because the hospitals often don't like the candidates that the college have chosen for them, but they still have to pay them and still have to employ them. So it can be quite delicate. But the hospitals love what we do, because these guys hit the ground running. They arrive extremely well qualified and able to start work on day one, whereas the ones who've just been sort of picked out of the crowd, as it were, without our qualification, don't have that advantage. So the idea is to try to get them to a level where they can be, in effect, ticked as having completed the basic sciences before they even start the clinical training. In order to implement this, obviously if we're undertaking to provide this information to students, it must be available equitably. It doesn't matter where they live. And we've made really great efforts to eliminate geographic disadvantage. And we also encourage interactivity. So there's nothing more miserable than trying to learn a fairly complicated subject entirely on your own. If you've got a group of buddies, or if you've got somebody you can ask questions of on a fairly immediate basis, that certainly does help considerably with the process. So just looking at some of the results, just to give you a feel for the sorts of numbers we're dealing with, we started this in 2001 and we had 12 students. Most of those 12 were Australian. I think there were 8 Australian and 4 New Zealanders, or it was about that order. In 2003, I got a phone call from the University of Sydney who said, look, we want to start a similar program to yours. Can you tell us how you went about it? And I said, yeah, sure. I said, well, but look, why don't we do it together? We're in the same business. Why don't we do it jointly? We're teaching it on the internet anyway, so you might as well do the same as we do, which took them a little while to get their head around. But with a few phone calls and 1 or 2 face-to-face meetings, they realised that there was some advantage in that. And we're both, it's Australian-New Zealand College, so we're both serving the same college in effect. So that happened. We entered into a formal collaboration with them, and it's made a huge difference. It's made it so much easier for all of us to both teach and mark and be part of the ongoing interactivity. In 2007, we had a combined total of 181 students who had enrolled at both institutions, and roughly a quarter of them had enrolled at Otago. And during that time, 121 have graduated. I just thought I'd give you a snapshot as to how they got on. 18 got a straight pass, 16 got a credit, 8 got a, this is semester 1 rather, semester 1 2007, so that's the sort of latest results that we've got, and 4 actually failed. Now, curiously, I was over recently at the college in Australia talking about this because they asked me to talk, they've got an education group over there, they asked me to go and give a similar talk to this actually, and at the end we had questions, and the first question they said was, how many people do you fail? And that's the way they think. When they used to run this, because originally to get onto these training schemes, you could sit the college's Part 1 exam, and once you passed that, you were then eligible to sit their Part 2. But they ran into legal difficulties because not everybody who had the Part 1 could get onto the training scheme to sit the Part 2. And they found themselves being sued by people who said, look, I've spent thousands of dollars, I've taken a year out of my job, I've passed your exam, now I demand the right to sit your Part 2. They said, well, sorry, you can't get on the training scheme. So So they scrapped it. They said, no, we can't do this. It's putting us at risk. So, but when they ran the part 1, they used to fail 75% of the people. Now, if you look at the figures, we are not far off that because, frankly, if you've only got a pass, you're wasting your time. Obviously, if you failed, you're definitely wasting time. But if you've only got a pass, you're not unlikely to get on. So really, the only ones they will take seriously are the ones who've either got a credit or a distinction. I mean, 1 or 2 with a pass have got on. It's not completely the end of the road, but it's unlikely that they'll get on. So we're not far off them, but they had a simple pass-fail system. You either passed it or you failed it, and that was it. We've got this graduated setup, which seems to be more successful. And there's a guy running around actually still in Dunedin who's now a radiology registrar. He got a pass, and he's very proud of his PG diploma in ophthalmic basic sciences, and he sticks it on the end of his name, but he's doing radiology. He'll never use that. It's of no value to him whatsoever, but he passed it, and he's got it, and he worked for it, and he's entitled to it. So it's not entirely frivolous that these guys sort of sit the stuff and then choose a different career. Obviously, he wanted to be an ophthalmologist. And then this is another thing. A number of these students will then go on to do a master's, particularly in Australia, because it is even more competitive in Australia than it is in New Zealand to get on. Now, we've currently got 4 people doing a master's. Before we ran this diploma, we'd only ever had 1 master's student in the last 30 years. It's very, very unusual for people who've done a clinical qualification such as medicine to then stop and do a master's or a PhD before they go and join the workforce. First of all, they'll all get a job. There's no unemployed doctors. Well, I shouldn't say none. There are very few unemployed doctors. And secondly, the salaries are huge. So these guys step straight into a 6-figure salary from day 1. They're not going to take 3 years out to do a PhD. So we've had very great difficulty attracting postgraduate students in medicine. We get plenty of postgrads in other fields, but medically qualified are very hard to get. But having done this diploma and still having yet to get onto the training scheme, they've probably got a year or so up their sleeve, and that's often the impetus to start a master's or hopefully complete one. So it has made a big difference to our master's intake. When we look at what the students think about it all, first of all, I have to say we very seldom get negative feedback. The feedback is usually very positive indeed, but they do find that the workload is more than they'd expected. I mean, these guys are all in work, and it's true what they say about junior docs. They really do work the most extraordinary hours. Some of them are literally working 60 to 80 hours a week, and they're often working 3 or 4 days of nights consecutively, etc. So to ask them to do, and we suggest that they do 20 hours a week minimum, to ask them to do that on top of everything else is a big ask. And some of them find it a bit more than they'd anticipated. But having said that, we've actually had people do 2 papers in 1 semester. One guy in particular, I remember his face was the colour of a piece of paper when he'd finished it. He looked absolutely haggard. He was completely... But he did actually get 2 very good results. So he was, and that and a full-time job I thought was a big ask. We did obviously have some technical problems at the beginning, and I have to say we still get a few, but fortunately not as many as we got. Specifically, the feedback, and this is based on recent feedback obviously, the assignments are too long and too infrequent. They want more assignments, but they want them to be of a shorter duration in effect. 3,000 words is a big assignment, but they'd rather do 4 or even 5 of shorter duration. The forum is very interesting. There's a total polarization in the forum. Some of them just love getting on there, the sort of blog crazy people, and others, because we say to them, right, this is your week, you've got to do your interactivity this week, and we give them marks for it as well. And some of them hate it. They've never sort of committed themselves to a public print forum like that before. So it was absolutely polarized. If you've got this sort of 1 to 5 spectrum, you've got all the 1s or all the 5s, nothing in the middle. Very strange. But most appreciate the forum. They do like looking at it, and I'll talk about more about the forum in a minute because we've turned it into a wiki, which is great. And as I said, we do actually give them marks for participation. We started off using Blackboard, and thanks, Dominic, for your information about this. I wondered what was used here, but I think a local solution would probably be the way it's best described. But anyway, and everybody who you talk to and you read about, most of them say it's a good management system. We've gone off it, and I'll tell you why we've gone off it shortly. Well, here are the advantages and the one we use. Oceanbrowser is a locally developed product. It was actually a guy who was doing a master's, and he used us as his guinea pigs, and another course actually in Wellington, an aviation medicine course. We were his 2 guinea pigs, and we ended up buying his system at the end of his project. So he's done well out of it too. It enables us online, offline access, which is very difficult to organise through Blackboard. A lot of the stuff we want to give them is very big, very large files, which obviously use up a huge bandwidth and stuff. And if you try and download them, particularly if you haven't got a broadband facility, and a number of students, of course, haven't. They've got dial-up. So people get posted to strange parts of the world. We had a guy who went to Vietnam, and he could only get onto the internet every once a week, so the guy was really in trouble. But he managed to keep going. But to try and expect him to download these huge files with limited access was just about impossible. We used to get feedback such as, I'd start the download and I'd go and make the tea, and when I came back it had downloaded and all that sort of stuff. So we had to find something which was better than that. So that's why we preferred this setup here. It's very user-friendly, and I'll show you in a minute hopefully how it works. You'll be able to see that it is very quick and easy to use. It's a dedicated application. It can be made to suit the purpose of the person that orders it, in effect. Security is huge. Nobody, in my experience, will give you their best slides or their best lectures if they're going to turn up on the streets of Hong Kong, for $2 a CD next week. There's no way they're going to let that information out of their grasp unless they can be absolutely certain. In fact, one of the lecturers I use in Auckland bet me a bottle of whiskey that he could crack it, because it's all encrypted. And I said, okay, I'll take you on. And I got the bottle of whiskey. He couldn't crack it. So he's quite happy. His stuff goes out, and he's quite comfortable with it. It enables online annotation, so if somebody's struggling with a diagram, they can show me what the diagram is, and I can scribble on it and send it online, as it were, and vice versa. We're developing that because that's got huge potential. We're going to be able to make hotspots and the like, whereby we can actually examine people online, but that hasn't quite made it yet. We've got this lovely online content authoring system where if we make a mistake, and we all make mistakes in our lectures, we can fix it without them actually knowing we've fixed it. So even though it goes out on the DVD with the mistake in it, when they access it, it's seamlessly amended. So it's very, very, that sort of, oh God, have I sent that out sort of moment, you can actually fix it up. And we also use VOIP a lot. It's actually, you'll see it on the thing in a minute. It's, the disadvantage is obviously it's got bugs, we're now in version 2.1. It costs us, we've got to pay for it. The guy's got to earn a living, he's got to keep himself off the streets. Whereas Blackboard, of course, doesn't cost us, it costs the university a fortune, but we don't actually pay for it out of our budget. And of course, we don't know if he got run over by a bus, then we'd be in serious trouble. And we don't know how long the thing's going to live, but long may it live, because it's certainly serving us extremely well. Just looking at the literature on how this stuff should be done, it's a quite a sort of sweeping statement here, but they're generally not reflecting the principles of the learning paradigm, which I think is probably fair, although we've done our best to make sure that they do. One of the things we said, and you'll see this if I get a chance to show you Oceanbrowser in detail, one of the things we said to our lecturers was, look, if you can't do better than the book, just give them the book. There's no point in giving them screeds and screeds of text which they can get from a textbook. Your job is to critique the book, to say, chapter 3 is great, chapter 4 is a load of rubbish, the second paragraph in chapter 5 has got a mistake. That's what your job is, not to say to them, here's a great chunk out of the book, now go and read it. They've read the book, now we're going to do better than that. And I have to say the lecturers have taken that to heart. They've done extremely well in that regard. And it should also obviously incorporate the principles of new education philosophy through the appropriate use of multimedia. Now it goes without saying that you can do so many more things on a computer than you can in a book, but it's surprising how few people actually use it. And I know why, because it's expensive, it's very time-consuming, etc. Well, we're gradually building up a bank of what we call RLOs to overcome that problem. The bandwidth issue I've already discussed. It can make it very difficult if you're not using an online-offline system. And of course, if you start compressing, as you do to reduce the bandwidth, then that can kill your image quantity. And that has a huge impact on, say, anatomy. It's no good looking at a fuzzy dissection or a fuzzy piece of bone or something. You've got to see the detail, otherwise it doesn't work. And by using DVDs, and I put U3, not that I know what a U3 memory stick is, but Rodney said, oh, U3 is the way it's going, so I stuck it in there. As I said before, it's all protected, and you've got to... The way we work it at the moment is to get access. We give students a DVD. We used to give them a batch of CDs, but we've just now recently provided it all on one DVD. They've got to obviously register. They're allowed to access the DVD for a month. And we can change that. We can make it a day if we want. We can make it 6 months. It's up to us. The big brother, the guy who's controlling it, knows who's on. He knows who's accessing it. And he can watch how long they're on for, too. It's really freaky in that respect. I hope not too many of them have read about Big Brother. But anyway, he's perfectly capable of switching them off if things are going wrong or if he thinks the wrong person's got hold of it. But it's a very good way of protecting your information. Again, referring to the literature, the two important components of it. This is the guy who's sort of trying to propose a virtual medical school. Would be a curriculum map and a bank of bank of reusable learning objects. We certainly took that to heart. This is, pardon the expression, this is the way we've gone. We provide them with the curriculum, the core competencies, the required knowledge, etc., and then the lectures, which they're not lectures in the sense of talking head lectures. They're just a synopsis of the lecturer's thoughts, and then these reusable learning objects as well. And I think this is right. I think it is the way things are going. They're just so darn expensive to make, and of course the other problem is there's no library of RLOs, not a decent one anyway. So you never know. You always run the risk of spending hours and hours making an RLO and then discovering somebody else has already made it, which is a total pain. We made a lovely RLO of what I call the visual pathways, which it's three-dimensional. You can see which part of the retina is represented on which part of the cortex, and what happens if you put a lesion in here, and what the MRI would look like at that slice, and what the differential, really fantastic stuff. And then we went and had a look, but fortunately people hadn't actually made that. They'd made something fairly similar, but what they had done was they'd made a beautiful RLO of the orbit. So the guy who did it has been in touch with the people who made the orbit and said, look, how about, it's like stamp collecting, how about I trade my visual pathways for your orbit so we can actually combine the two? Now that's smart, that's clever, because they could never make what he'd made, and he certainly couldn't. Well, they could, but it'd be silly if they did. Unfortunately, at this stage, they haven't managed to get them to work together, but it'll happen. He's actually going to put aside about 6 months next year to do that, so I think that'll be a thing to look forward to. But that's the way it's going. They're also interactive. Optics is a good example. I'll show you one in a minute where optics lends itself to this. You've got obviously screeds of diagrams and ray diagrams and stuff, but with interactivity you can just change the power of the lens or change the object distance or what have you and see the effect straight away, which you can never do in a book. They also make good use of difficult resources, and a good example of dissections and prosections. Now, one of our anatomists has got some magnificent, what they call expanded skulls, and I don't know if I hope nobody's squeamish. If you are, I'd better say so, because I've got some pretty gory pictures coming up shortly. What they do is they take a skull, and he's got infants from about, I think, age of 6 months up to about 10 or 15 years of age, and they fill it full of dry beans, and then they pour water. It sounds really crude, and it just slowly expands the thing, and all the articulations of the skull start separating very slowly, very gradually, and they get these disarticulated skulls. Now those things are like tissue paper. Those little filaments between the bones are just like tissue paper. And there's no way this guy would let you near them. He wouldn't let you touch them. But of course he's photographed them and he's got them in 3D, so now we can all have a look at them. And it is the most fabulous way of learning that sort of anatomy. Well, even if you were in his dissection room, you wouldn't get to touch those things. You might get to see them. But now everybody can see them. So it's working really well in that respect. And the same with dissections. We can go through a series of dissections and they can just piece, whereas you'd have to stand over this horrible formalin preserved specimen and, one or two would be getting a bit queasy. With this system, the camera doesn't faint. It just clicks away and you can gradually work your way through the dissection and they can eventually be put back together as an interactive model. So it's ideal for that sort of thing. Here's the optics one that I was going to show you. This is a piece of the text. There's actually, I think, a total of 10 diagrams altogether that go with this particular thing. Now, this is where you discover that I'm a total klutz when it comes to techno stuff, but let's see if I can make this work. I had it set up before. There it is there. And can I get this a bit higher? No, ain't going to move. Stuck. Okay, it'll work from here. Hopefully. That's not moving from here either. Don't you just hate it when these things go wrong? Gotta put my glasses on now to see what's gone wrong. So I was just saying to Ma before, I'll set this up so that I won't have to mess around during the presentation, but setting it up, it's frozen it as well. Oh, there we go, right. So you see you can move it from here and see what's going on. Now, at the same time, of course, you've got a script telling you what's happening at that particular moment. If we combine this one here, which is the illumination and the observation combined, then you can see the observer and the subject, obviously. There's an observer back in here somewhere. Sorry, he's hidden back here. See if I can move this now. No, it ain't going to budge, is it? Anyway, you can see what I'm getting at. And the text has changed, so there's now new information on this page. And this one here, I'm particularly proud of this because there's about 5 different explanations of this particular phenomenon in the textbooks. And this is the correct one. And it is a very subtle movement. If you just look here, there's a very subtle movement there, which is really difficult to represent diagrammatically. Do you see it? Just that subtle, it's called an against movement. As the light goes up, that light there goes down. You follow me? Is that working? Now if we change this to a plane mirror, see it's now going the same direction. Very subtle, but it's there. You can see that width movement. The back bit's going at the same. Now that's very difficult to represent diagrammatically, and the students really struggle with that. It's a difficult concept for them. And here it is, it's explained for them quite effectively. We can also do fancy things, none of which are necessary, but it just makes them enjoy the thing a bit more. It's not vital to the understanding of it, but it just helps them sort of get a grip on what's going on. So that's one of the little RLOs that we've actually made ourselves. Let's see if we can get back into the presentation. Yep. Okay. Good. So they can be useful for explaining difficult concepts. Oops, I've gone backwards here anyway. Or things that are bad explained, like that reversal thing in the concave mirror. They can also be used for clinical demonstrations without the need for patients. Now this is very useful. You try getting volunteers for this every time you want to learn, or teach somebody how to do it. It's a simple little video, but we can show it to everybody. They're all on the same page. They've all studied the principles. They know how the thing works. Now they've got to put it into practice, and so we just provide these little things. Now that's just measuring the pressure inside somebody's eye. A very simple technique. It's something that's done every day of the week by somebody who's in practice. But if you've never done it before, then obviously it's best to see it done in this form before you actually get let loose on a real patient. And the patients appreciate it too, I can tell you. They can usually tell they're quite good at picking and somebody's actually done it before, so it's nice if they've got a bit of practice. Okay, so we can also make objects accessible, and of course they're easily updated, so that's another advantage. This is a picture of the CDs that, sorry, no it's not, the next one is the picture. Some of the RLOs that we've produced, we've actually now started to use in the undergraduate curriculum. I mean, not all of them and not any detail, because undergrads don't need to know a great deal about ophthalmology, but we've sort of cherry-picked some of the best bits and given them to the undergrads, and they love it. You know, you give them a handout and they turn it into a dart and throw it away. Give them the CD, they think it's great. You know, they put it on their desktop and they're really proud of it. I think it's got a little bit of artwork on the cover. The e-ophthalmoscope, I'll just highlight that here if I can. No, I can't. The e-ophthalmoscope, the one with the orange in there, we use for assessment. We've got 500 cases there, and the students navigate. First of all, they read the case history, and then they navigate with the mouse as if they were using an ophthalmoscope. So they get to see what they would see through an ophthalmoscope, but using the mouse. And then the image disappears, and they have to answer the questions. And they get, when they've done 10 questions, they get a 5-letter code. And they've got to come to me with the 5-letter code to find out what their mark is. So they can't cheat. And it's very good. We've been actually using it for, shall we say, remedial work with some of the students. It's been working quite well. So that was one we developed for this particular course, but we've used it for the undergrads as well. There are the CDs that they used to get for the actual course, but as I say, it's now all combined into one DVD. So looking at the advantages of an internet-based distance learning course, well, obviously they can study from any location and they can study it within limits. They've got to do it within a seminar. They can study at their own pace. Here's another one which people often overlook. You can pick your lecturers from anywhere you like. You can pick the very best people in the field anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter where they actually reside. They can provide material on your course. The lecturers can still travel, and I'm an example of that. We're in semester, I think we're in week 12 of the second semester, and I'm still involved. I get in on the net and look up, see who's doing what, and answer questions, etc. So that can still be done. The students can travel, as I mentioned, this guy went to Vietnam, and there have been other examples of a similar nature. The library facilities are available online. I'm sure they are here too. All universities now are virtually online. It's absolutely fantastic. I think you get a better service online than you do by going to the library, but that's just my particular bias. Obviously, assignments can be posted and marked electronically. The students can go back and use their RLOs whenever they want to. Once the lectures have been prepared, they remain available for the next semester. You don't have to keep doing your stuff all over again. I mean, you know, none of us would give the same lecture year in, year out, but revisions are not big, and you can actually just leave them there and tweak them as you want to. And it certainly encourages self-directed learning, which is absolutely huge these days, and rightly so. Disadvantages, obviously the lack of awareness, the requirements of distance taught courses within the university structure. God, I've got more grey hairs over that. It's unbelievable. I mean, they're just not ready for staff that don't live in New Zealand. They're just not ready for it. They don't know how to handle it. You know, they've got to live in New Zealand, otherwise you can't be paid. Well, that's rubbish. I mean, of course you can be paid. It doesn't matter. You know? But anyway, we've had all sorts of problems with that. They are very expensive and very time-consuming to set up. They take hours and hours and hours to set up. You've really got to make a huge commitment to get them going. There's a guy at the moment who's working with us, and hopefully we'll be collaborating very closely shortly, who's trying to set up a surgical anatomy course using the same technique that we're using. And boy, he's got some work ahead of him. And he knows it too. I mean, he's put aside a whole year and he's got screeds of people helping him, but it's a major undertaking. But once he does it, it will be hugely... Sorry. Yeah, okay. I'll remember that one. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, that's possibly the one that you're interested in. It's very hard to pay and to even recognise overseas staff. development costs, it's a real bogey. I mean, if you want to make a new building, or if you want to buy some new equipment, or you want to employ additional staff, that's within everybody's ambit of understanding. But development costs, well, what's that? You know, paper and ink. Well, it isn't in our case. It's a great deal more than that. We've got to pay programmers, we've got to pay people to develop the stuff for us, and it's very hard to justify those sorts of costs. Linking of exam times can be very frustrating. We've had people from London, a guy in Los Angeles who actually did 4 papers on the internet, and getting times when everybody, because obviously if he's ahead of everybody else, you know, what he don't know, I'm sure he wouldn't be on the phone telling them what the questions were. You have to have them all start the exam at the same time, otherwise there's a risk that the information can leak out. And the universities won't allow you to do it if you don't, actually. They're very strict about that. So it can be quite tricky to coordinate exam times. These are sort of Australia-New Zealand details, but it's the sort of thing that we end up having to do. We at one stage discovered there was a disparity between the fees, and it was cheaper to actually do it in Australia, well, it still is. But if they wanted to study in New Zealand, they had to be treated as an international student, and we ended up giving them a scholarship. And then we discovered, well, actually, if we only give Australian scholarships, we're running a risk of being racist. And a Malaysian student actually said, well, you know, I've paid full international fees. How come I don't get it as cheap as the Australians get? So we really have that awful difficulty there, which we've wriggled out of. We haven't solved it, but we've wriggled out of it. The TEC funding, I don't know if courses are subsidised here or not. We have a subsidy. Every dollar that we take in fees, we get, I think, $3.50 back from the government. Well, we discovered that there were actually, although we run 4 papers, or 5 if you count the practicum, 2 of them were being rated at one level and 2 were being rated at a different level, and neither of them were correct. So for 2 years, we couldn't work this budget out at all. How were we getting, you know, this amount of money for that lot and this amount for that? And it turned out neither of them were right. In fact, both of them were below where they should have been. So it's just this sort of minor thing which can be so irritating if you're trying to involve or get involved with the decisions that are made. So in conclusion, I think it's fair to say that medical teaching, and all teaching for that matter on the internet, is becoming more extensively used. However, having said that, postgraduate medical education towards a recognised university qualification is still relatively rare, and a lower number of other courses exist. To the best of our knowledge, there's no equivalent postgraduate diploma in ophthalmic basic sciences. Oh, that's my wish list. We'll move on. I think if there's a minute, I'm going to try and show you the... I put this on before I realised that this might be a reference to the Canadian currency, which is not intended. So. I can show you Oceanbrowser, sure, if there's time, but I'm happy to take questions at this stage, and then I can demonstrate Oceanbrowser after if you wish, whatever. Or maybe I've talked long enough, I don't know.
Good. No, let's start with questions, and then
Okay.
I'd like to see a quick demo. We make sure we leave time at the end.
Yep, sure.
Give people a chance
Yep, sure.
to ask questions. So just if we can get you the microphone so your question or comment can be recorded, we'd appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I've got 2 questions. The lack of awareness of DE requirements, I think it was around slide 30 or something. Could you elaborate on that? Was that from the admin side, or from the instructor side, or from the learner side? Or
That was purely from the administration side.
in what respect?
Well, they're just not ready for, I mean, the mindset of we'll call them the bureaucracy, trying to be polite, is that students enroll and turn up for lectures on the campus. And that's the way everything is geared. To have a student who lives in Timbuktu, who only comes for maybe 1 semester and then drops out for a year and then perhaps another semester later on, or a lecturer who lives in London, is way outside the ambit of the administrators in the university. They just haven't got their head around how that works. Now, it's not too bad with the students, but it certainly caught us out many times with the staff, and we still haven't solved it. If you wanted to be a lecturer on our course, literally I would have to employ you on a contract. You'd have to be a subcontractor to me or to our university, and you'd have to sort of fill in a contract. And one of the lecturers said, I'm not signing this. He said, this is the sort of contract you give a plumber. and I'm not a plumber. And then I want to be recognised. I want to be on your staff list as a senior lecturer or adjunct professor or what have you. Well, you don't do that with plumbers, and it's the same contract. So that's the sort of difficulty we run up against. And they're not going to change the rules on the basis of a course that's only attracting 40 or 50 students a year. So we've got that.
So does it have anything to do with distance courses, or in sense, from the administration's point of view, looked at as being inferior to on-campus, or just the fact that...
I don't think it's inferior. I mean, it possibly is, but I think it's more, it's beyond their ambit or their comfort zone. They've no experience in it. So, most of the time, I don't know if it's like what it's like in Waterloo, when you pick up a phone and ring somebody in the registry, you'll get a person and you'll go through this whole rigmarole with them, and then they'll say, oh, hang on, I need to say to so-and-so. So you get on to so-and-so. And then you say the whole thing all over again. And then they say, oh, actually, this isn't my area. This is so-and-so's area. And then you go to them, and then you get a voicemail. And you've got to start the whole process all over again, So there's all that kind of stuff going on. It just
Can I ask another question? Yeah. Okay. You referenced some research about medical teaching websites in general are not reflecting the principles of the learning paradigm. Yeah. Could you elaborate more on that?
Most of them are just putting up, you might as well give them put up a piece of text. It's just a piece of text that they're putting on the internet. It's not actually encouraging self-directed learning. It's not making the student or whoever's involved in it do a bit of study on their own. It's not encouraging self-directed learning. So that's the teaching learning paradigm. Are we there delivering material, or are they trying to learn off us? I mean, that's the debate that goes on constantly. Am I standing and delivering to you, or are you sitting here trying to absorb information and I'm just the conduit or the guide on the side? It's the sage on the stage versus the guide on the side argument. And that's the paradigm, which most of those websites, when you look at them, certainly the early ones, weren't using that opportunity to be interactive.
And so from the guide on the side point of view, I guess that's where you're focusing in on.
Absolutely.
Which maybe if we do have a look at the Oceanbrowser, we'll be able to see how you're implementing the guide inside.
Hopefully, yes.
Right,
that's exactly right. Hopefully, yeah.
A couple of questions on the learning objects, and it ties in with ownership. But two things with the learning objects, the RLOs, as you call it.
Yeah.
One is who owns that? When you say there's some collaboration, is it the?
Well, if we collaborate with the orbital one is the only one that we've gone outside our campus on, that'll be a nightmare. I don't know. I think we'll probably end up sort of. You see, these things can be sold. I mean, you can actually make quite a bit of money out of these. The number of people who make a great deal of money are very, very rare indeed. Most people think they can make a lot of money and end up making peanuts. The best one we ever did was a thing, I don't know how much of this you're familiar with, but there's a machine called a slit lamp. We made a thing called the Slit Lamp Explorer, which was really just an instruction book for a slit lamp. Well, we managed to sell quite a few copies of that for $250 a copy when it first came out. It's since been, other people have attempted to do the same thing. So we've sort of lost the edge on that. But initially we made quite a lot of money out of that. That's been our most successful RLO. I have to say this, the one I was talking about before, the visual pathways has potential to be quite lucrative as well. But basically, you're not going to make a fortune out of it. If you cover your costs, you've done well. So you're saying whose intellectual property is it, and what happens if it gets sold? The answer is I haven't a clue, but we'd work something out.
Because it's the faculty involvement, the development team, and actually with the reusability of these things, it's almost safe to say it's been questionable on the merits of putting a lot of money into some of those. But
there's been quite a lot of work done on this. IMS is the big standard organization that seems to be referenced here, and what they do in these objects is they actually assign metadata to the objects, which includes for example, ownership and authorship, and there can be multiple authors. And there's actually quite a sophisticated structure for identifying authors and of parts of a learning object, and right down to the whole object. And then what you have to have, though, is an agreement with regard to the partition of any money that comes from it. We're fortunate here at Waterloo that if Don Callan developed one of these, which he did, by the way, he has the ownership of that. The university has no ownership. So when you're in a situation where the university takes a hunk of the action, then it's a different situation. But there is actually a technology for carrying that forward and documenting those authors.
You're very fortunate in that, Dominic, because anything I do is automatically the property of my university because I'm working for them. No, not while I'm here. Good thought. Good thought. I'll be back.
But
Sorry.
Just tying a little bit into the learning object and away from the ownership and into something I was actually going to get into was you said that learning objects, it did bring in more engagement. The students like to see it, things that are, the benefits of it. Have you had any success, or do you use a lot of things like case studies, problem-based learning, stuff that's different than the standard lecture, and also not as, I don't want to use the word problematic of learning objects, but have you done any work on that, either in part of the demo coming up? Yeah.
We've looked at specific learning objects. A good example was the eophthalmoscope, which we actually did a study on. We got a number of, these were undergrads as it turned out, and we put them aside and made them do this thing, and then we modified it and did it again. So we've actually looked at the outcomes of that, and they were very good. The students, by and large, like them. Whether it improves the outcome is, I think, the gist of your question. I'm not sure. My approach is if they didn't work, they wouldn't use them, and they do use them, and they get very upset when they break, because they do break, obviously, the links get broken and stuff. So I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating rather than the academic proof as such. I'm sure if we ever did, and probably we will do, a specific survey aimed at looking at how many RLOs had been used and which ones are the most useful, we'd get some very valuable data from that. But I think we'd find, by and large, they were considerably assisted by them. Yeah. I think it's purely anecdotal.
Hi, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm kind of interested in the 50-50 split on your discussion board. Are they asynchronous or are they synchronous?
Well, I'll show you the discussion board in a minute. You can judge for yourself. The idea is that we'll have week 6, let's say, and you'll be appointed as the not the facilitator, but it's your week. You've got to make the first blog, if you like, on the discussion board, and then somebody else will come in and say, well, yeah, that's great, but you've missed this bit out, or can I add this, or I've been looking at something else and I found this really good URL, I'll stick that on, and it just builds up, and that's how it works. Now, this is purely them, interacting with each other. Now, the next phase is, okay, they've all got a problem now. They've hit on something that nobody knows the answer to. That's when the tutor pops up and says, oops, you made a mistake, or here's the answer to the question that you're all scratching your heads over. You give them a chance to sort it out for themselves. And if the tutor can't answer it, then the tutor comes to the lecturer. So the lecturer, in my case, I do about a third of one of the papers. I get about one email a week during my sessions. It's as little as that.
So what are the reasons for them hating it, and what are the reasons for them liking it? That's number one.
Well, I think it's just personality. I think some people just, the Asians particularly don't sort of ask questions in a group. This is not meant to sound racist, but, if you've got a group of students, you can almost guarantee that the Asians won't be asking questions. And other people don't like going on to a sort of facility where what they've written can be seen and judged and criticised possibly, whereas others love it. They just can't wait to get on there and, I won't say show off, but, I don't understand it. That's actually a fairly recent bit of feedback, and I haven't really got my head around what it is that they particularly love or particularly hate about it, but it was fascinating to see the huge split. Most questionnaires, as get 3 get circled 90% of the time. This was both ends. It was really bizarre. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, my questions were along your questions that you just asked about the how interactive the forum was and whether there was a, shall I say, a live portion, or was it basically all on an online basis but not live?
The forum is straight out, chat room stuff. We do have, and I should have mentioned that, an opportunity to interact on the VOIP. They can either ring each other up, or they can get on a teleconference, or we might organise a teleconference. You know, if you get a little study group, like 3 or 4, they may all go on a conference at once using VOIP, and that's perfectly possible.
And I can agree that some of the work that Don and I did many years ago in Japan, that there are different personalities involved in learning, and our experience with students in Japan was that they did not like or appreciate having to ask questions. And that was very difficult for them, whereas we found that most unusual because we wanted that interaction. It's interesting that that's now carrying on over into an online situation.
Well, actually, it's almost the opposite. I won't say it's totally the opposite, because the Asians do like blogging, you know, they do like getting on chat rooms, but certainly in the face-to-face, they hate it. I went to China for 10 days, and I did exactly that. I had a 10-day seminar in China, and I couldn't get a question out of anybody. And there was several hundred. And even with 2 interpreters, because I can't speak a word of Chinese, I had 2 interpreters, one either side of me, and they were sort of taking in turns. And even through the interpreters, I couldn't get questions out of them. And in the end, on about day 4 or day 5, I thought, hang on, if I get them to write their questions down, will that work? And sure enough, that got them going. Once the thing was sort of passed forward, it was anonymous, somebody would read it out, and we had a question. But no, they wouldn't ask. Yeah, quite strange.
We found that in Canada too, compared to the United States, is there's a much more, if you do give people questions, a chance to write them, they're more likely to ask them rather than just blurting them out.
Yeah.
Do you have a question, Thomas?
Going to make the same comment about this love-hate relationship, that is, some people love to perform and others don't.
Exactly. It's introvert, extrovert stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, the other one is, medicine is basically a very practical subject, eventually, with certain aspects, not the case. But how do you deal with practicums? Because they have to go somewhere to practice. I mean, do they come to...
Well, okay, what we do in the practicum, I should have gone into more detail, is they come to us for 3 weeks. Now, even though we've got 4 internet papers, most of them do the top 3, anatomy, physiology, and optics. And when they come for the practicum, that's exactly how we run the practicum. The first week is anatomy, the second week is physiology, the third week is optics. And we put into practice. They'll go to a dissecting room, they'll be given a cadaver or half a cadaver, and they'll be told to dissect this and look at that, and they'll be given prosections, etc. For the physiology, they're given all the various psychometric things that they'd have to deal with and all the equipment, etc. And for the optics, it's the same. So, well, no, you don't. You see, if you want to do the diploma, you can do the 4th paper. And that's exactly what this guy who was living in Los Angeles did. He didn't want to come out for the practicum. He'd never intended to be a practicing ophthalmologist. In fact, I'll tell you exactly what he's doing. I won't tell you his name, obviously. He's working on these retinal implants that they're putting little microchips in the backs of people's retinas. That's where he's working. And he wanted this background, he wanted this information, so he could be a better member of the team. So he did our paper. And he did the 4th one. He did the genetics paper. So he's now got the diploma without doing the practicum.
So just take a couple more questions, and then we'll let you show the Oceanbrowser. I just don't want to. We have till 1:30, but I know people will want to leave potentially earlier than that. You and then the person.
I wanted to ask, how long would it take to complete the diploma, and how much would it cost?
I should have said that. It's actually 18 months of, if you do 3 papers, because it's obviously 3 semesters, and then a 3-week practicum. If you do 4 papers, it's 2 years. That's a minimum. Now, it can be done over over a 5-year period. You can choose any time you like within the 5-year period. But from the day you enroll to the day you complete, it must be done within 5 years.
And the cost?
Cost?
Yeah.
If you're a New Zealander, it's about $2,000 a paper, and give or take. If you're not a New Zealander, it's about $6,000 a paper. So it's expensive.
On the back here.
Hi. As Director of Distance, our online learning program here at Waterloo, I have a couple of a bit administrative questions for you. I'm interested...
You should have warned me, Dominic.
He didn't know. I'm a secret plant. I'm actually interested in the development of your learning objects, and I'm curious about the investment that's made there. So I'm a bit curious how long they would take, something like the one you demonstrated. Yeah. How long would that take, and sort of what kind of financial investment would you have had to make?
Okay. The one I demonstrated is possibly not the best example, but I can give you the answer to that.
Average one, then.
Well, now, let me answer that one first. The guy who worked on that actually works for the university, so we got him, in effect, cheap. he was particularly interested in it. He thought it was a worthwhile project, and he can pick and choose. Believe me, this guy is so sought after. He can say, "Get out of here," or he can say, "Yeah, I like that one. I'll do it." And he's very clever. He's very quick. He's very good at it. And it took him, I think, 2 months to finish it. And there were lots of meetings in between, sort of what do I do here, what do I do there, sort of stuff. I think it was about 2 months, and the cost.
It's basically his salary, 2 months' salary.
Well, yes, but we have to pay his salary. I mean, we have
Right.
to pay a proportion of it. In fact, we're probably paying quite a bit of his salary, actually.
Right.
But we have to. I think it cost us about $10,000 in the end, all up. Now, another example. The Visual Pathways one, we're up to 40,000 already on that, and we haven't finished it. And it's going to be another 40,000, I think, at least to finish it.
And that one's taking a lot longer to develop then?
A lot longer. And we're having to employ a group. You probably know this crowd. Anybody watch the America's Cup of yachting? Remember the little simulations of the yachts? Well, that's made by a group in Dunedin called Animation Research Limited. You can look them up on the web. They did the 3D stuff on the visual part. It's fabulous stuff. It's, fly through the pathways sort of stuff. But they're expensive, very, very dear.
Right.
And trying to justify those kind of costs, as you all know, for course development, course development, you don't spend that kind of money on course development. See what I'm saying?
Right. The reusability becomes quite an interesting question then.
Well,
if you can reuse
indeed it does.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It should be put over 5 years or even 10 years. But of course it isn't. It comes out of this year's budget.
When you talked about accessibility in your slides, you were talking about making that product accessible to other groups of people, correct? Rather than, and we've got some big issues here in Canada around accessibility for disabilities and having to try and make our products. That's not the kind of accessibility you were talking about?
No. What I was referring to there was if you live in Wagga Wagga, as opposed to Sydney or Dunedin, you cannot be denied information that's available to somebody who lives in Sydney. It just cannot be done. We cannot offer a course and have some students disadvantaged by virtue of their geography or their disability. But it doesn't apply so much in our case, but compared to others, everybody's got to have the Australians say, a fair suck of the salve.
And we've got the exact same kind of mandate, but for any reason you cannot be denied access, which is interesting when you think about trying to convert something as complex as that learning object you demonstrated into something that would be accessible to somebody who is vision impaired.
Well, that's true.
I just want to make a quick comment, and I'd like you to do the Oceanbrowser. I just want to make it clear. The concept RLO, the reusable, is any learning object. It could be a piece of text, it could be a video, it could be what you've got, which is an interactive reusable learning object, or a simulation even. So that word RLO could apply to just even a text piece in a document or a book or a video or anything else. So what you've gone on there, which is what's expensive, is interactive or simulation type learning objects. And the experience is, France did the original work in this area back in the 60s, is that it costs 400 hours at least of invested time per hour of actual experience. That was a number that came out of the French study. So God knows what that is right now. But these are significant efforts in thinking it through, understanding it, and then how are you going to show it? I mean, that was really simple looking, but behind that, including doing it within a browser, is really complex. And it gets across that idea of interactive being better than just looking at something. So maybe you could show us the Oceanbrowser.
Sure. Let's see if I can get it back up again.
Why is it called Oceanbrowser, by the way?
Well, that's a good question. The OC is ophthalmic course, and he just went on. Aviation medicine was the other group, and I don't know where they went, but we're very proud of Ocean because of our connection. Let's see if I can make this work. Right, so there's Oceanbrowser there. Now, can I get it to go? I don't know why it's not dragging. Oh, yes, it is dragging now. Good. Excellent. Okay. So, in effect, there are the 3 or 4 papers on the net that they have access to. Now, obviously, no student would see this. This is me, the supervisors. They would only see the paper that they'd enrolled for. So, they may have enrolled for ophthalmic anatomy. So, they click on this, and up comes the little headings here, modules, and the modules obviously the various weeks that they have to study. And they've then got access to the Virtual Anatomy Museum and extras there, unfortunate term. We'll use week 5 as an example. I'll show you a couple of weeks here just to sort of pick out some of the more interesting things. So in each week they'd get the outline of the course, so they'd be told what they need to know, and in this case it's actually split between 2 lecturers. So this third of the idea is every week you have 3 equivalent 1-hour lectures. So the first one is done by Rob Weatherhead, the second one is done by Rob Weatherhead, and the third one is done by John Dixon. So each of these guys has their own guide, and that's what they're expected to know. That's the required knowledge. So if we have a sneak look at that, they'll have a. That's the sort of curriculum, if you like, that they should be aware of. And then we'll cut down. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but they've got to know this as well, obviously. And so by the end of the week, they've got a nice checklist, and then if you want, they can actually say, okay, well, there are the core competencies. I should be able to say, by the end of this week, I've learnt all of these bits of information. So if we actually look at the individual lectures, there's the lecture on the orbital and ocular vasculature. So this guy is really giving them his version of it. He's not saying, this is the book. It's assumed that they've read the book. It's assumed that they know what the book includes, but he's actually going to critique the book. So here he is. I would most strongly recommend reading chapter 3, the 8th edition. So, he's saying you've got to read that first, and then these are the bits you need to be familiar with. So it's really as if he was standing there talking. I mean, we could make it talk, and we probably in years to come will, but it's really his version of what he thinks they need to take from this to get a good overview of the subject. And he just goes on, and you can see how far down we've got. We haven't got very far at all in his lecture, so there's a fair bit to go. And then if we cut down to this guy here, who's the third lecturer, he's much more succinct. I'll actually cut down to this one, I think. Yes, so lecturer's comments. See, he's saying, well, all right, this topic's covered in the greater topic of the orbit, but inevitably, more closely examined human anatomy, the distinction between structure and function becomes blurred. So he's saying, these are the problems you've got. You've got to learn the basic anatomy. We don't want people hacking into somebody's orbit and not knowing what they're going to find when they get there. But at the same time, you've got to know what these things actually do and how you adjust the function. So it's really a sort of like a monologue, if you like, of the individual saying, well, this is my perspective on it. I'm supposed to be the expert, and this is what I've learned. And he's again talking there. The information is largely drawn from Chapter 4 of Wolff's Anatomy. I'll direct you to the relevant text without embellishment, as I often cannot communicate detail any better than the book. Well, that's great. That's what we want him to say. If he just took a chunk out of the book and threw it up there, well, that wouldn't be what we're after. So these guys are really taking these instructions to heart, and it's great that they are. Now, if we can then move on to, there's not too many what I call wizard diagrams in this one, so I'm going to go back to week 5.
So presumably behind this, there's some sort of authoring language or authoring system, correct?
I wish.
Oh, okay.
I wish. I mean, the way we did this, Dominic, we taught this stuff for 20 years for the Part 1 exam. And then the college said, we're going to scrap it. So we said, well, this is ridiculous. We've got all these guys, we were the only course in Australasia teaching it. Got all these guys who are really good in their field. Why waste this expertise? So we said, we're going to do this on the internet. This is what we want you to do. And I guess by authoring language, you mean instructions. There's no format. I mean, it's formatted.
Now, if you want to put the text of this in, for example,
yes.
and diagrams and so on, is there a software package, if you want, that helps you to do that and structure this, or is it just web pages? We
said to them, you can do it any way you want. You can write it by hand, you can do it in Word, you can do it in PDFs, anything you want. We didn't want them put off. We didn't want any barriers, because these guys are busy. They give us an hour a year or a couple of hours a year to do their lectures. We want them to sit down for 10 or 20 hours and compile their notes into this sort of form. We didn't want them blocked. Now, I think today, if we were starting again, we would do exactly that, because we've got all sorts of problems with formatting. But you're dealing with some fragile egos, some busy people. You just want to get that material out of them. And we said, any form you want, just whatever you take, whatever you can give us, we'll take. And we then try to work around it. And it's been to our cost, but we at least got the thing going. You're acknowledging the fragile ego bit. Yeah.
Well, and process.
And process, yeah. I mean, it's so easy to say, oh, that's too hard, I won't do it.
We created, not me personally, I provided technology, but a program on water quality management, which has about 12, you call them papers, 12 papers in it. Mm-hmm. And it required a lot of different people to contribute to that. So in effect, they could provide it any way they liked, and we had an editor who then pulled it all together. It was the only way you could really do it, because you say these are busy people, and if you put barriers in their way, they have to learn something new. Forget it. It isn't going to happen.
That's right. Why bother? And it's such a shame. But that was the view we took. Now, I think we're sufficiently well established now. We could actually say to people, you want to be part of this course, this is what you've got to do, but I haven't pushed my luck so far. But yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
I think some of the newer approaches do provide, not so much for the end user, where you want to get the material from them no matter what, but when you're actually entering it, where it supports the entry of the material and also the addition of metadata to it. I know that Colin Mayfield developed for the UN University a system like this based on some original things. Yeah. But that actually is an authoring system. It allows you to add metadata here, saying like what kind of object, there can be objects within objects. It's a hierarchy of objects, so you can have a text object and a diagram object and a simulation object and so on. And that ability to enter that material and to code it using typically XML metadata on it allows you then to reassemble that in any way you want, and in fact take it into any system and provide different visual layouts and so on for it. So
the expert did not do that.
No, the expert
it was the editor that did that level of detail.
And you see, the other thing, Shirley, you've got to say ahead of time, I want all this money up front because I'm going to run this course next year. And they say, go away. They say, show us your students first. You haven't got a course, you can't get the students. It's a sort of catch-22. Apologies to the administration, but it's a fact. You've got to have the money to start the thing off. So we had to do this on the smell of an onion ring, literally. And then we got some enrollments, and then we started to get a bit more traction. But it's very hard to get it up and running. Yeah.
Other questions? Any comments? Do you have any more that you want to?
Are you here for a while?
I'm here for a week.
Well, it seems like it might be of interest to you to have a look at our model.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Because we have the good fortune of having had a very well-established distance education program at Waterloo that's almost 40 years old now. So we actually don't have some of the administrative hurdles that you face in terms of getting the registry, as you refer to it, to understand how to, deal with. It's not perfect, but I mean, some of those hurdles have already been overcome.
Yeah, well, I'd love to know how.
And the way that we develop online learning is fairly well established now as well. And, where an instructor is the content expert, and then we have a team of folks in our office that help them build that material to go online. And I mean, we'd be certainly happy to try and give you a view of what we do here as well, if you're interested.
Let's make a time. I'll see you at the end. I'd love to, because I mean, we're novices at this game. And frankly, my job as a teacher, I don't want to get involved with this. I wish Rodney had been here, because I'm sure you could have had a great chat to Rodney. But I mean, I got a phone call from HR recently, and they said, I was trying to employ a guy from the UK, and they said, well, this is what you've got to do. And I said, hang on a minute. I said, I teach students. I said, this is what you've got to do. If you want me to fill in these forms, you fill them in first. I'll sign them, but I'm not going to sit there filling in the forms for you. So, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there, but it's my job is teaching, and I'm happy to share this with people, but I can't defend some of the practices of the...
Oh, is that Rodney on your authorship or Dangerfield? Which?
It seems to me you're in what I guess I call the bootstrap mode right now, where
Yes.
you build enough to get students,
Yes.
and then you've got students. Now you can convince people to give you a little bit more
Give
money
them
to
more
build a bit
money.
more.
Exactly right.
And frankly, that's the way our distance education started. Now, it was taped lectures at the time as opposed to the internet. Obviously, this was, as you said, 40 years ago. And it was a bootstrap mechanism. Somebody got the idea, hey, let's try this.
Give it a go.
And it gradually built up to the point where it has a high degree of credibility in the university now, and so people recognize when it needs resources. They don't always get them, of course, but at least the recognition is there. Is that fair, Kevin?
Yes, and we're getting closer to.
Well, it's such an exciting field, and it really does fit a bill. You know, these guys are busy, they want to move on, they want to get qualifications, they want to get into specialties, but how are they going to do it? They're working every hour that God gives them. There's no way they can take 6 months or a year out to do a course, but they're happy to do this sort of thing, and we should be providing it.
Just for the sake of everybody, we can end now. Obviously, there are connections. We'd like to continue on and talk about this. Gordon, thank you very much for coming. I wanted to warn you that, tell people beforehand that you were a friend of Graham Strong, but we thought it would seriously deplete the audience. And we have a big switch at the back that we set up just in case it was another of Graham's things. We could have cut you off from the world. It was really an interesting and very informative talk. I thank you very much for coming here. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.